Mr. Wood, okay, I swear, Mr. Bartlett, you and Mr. Ward are like working together. Because every time we like do something in his class, you like mention it in his class. Or like you were doing satire, you're like, yes, it's satire. You're like, okay, no wins. So I had, yeah, you guys always like really points.
Great minds think alike.
He's not a great mind.
Oh, wow.
We are not on Mr. Ward. We don't like the
Okay, so a couple things in really quick. You're gone on Monday, Tuesday. I have to pick this up. And just to review, these are the documents for the DBQ then. So I don't care what happens, we're doing it tomorrow. And it was the strength of the opposition forces rather than the ineptitude and stubbornness of President Wilson that led to the Senate defeat of the Treaty of Versailles. That is your prompt. You have to take a position on that. Does everyone have this? Did anyone look at the documents and have any questions? So think in terms of, don't forget, there are 3 groups in the Senate. Oh, how many votes do they need in the Senate to ratify a treaty? And there's irreconcilables, reservationists, and loyal Democrats. And also, there's different degrees of liberal and conservative foreign policy. And so, irreconcilables, are they more conservative or liberal? Irreconcilables, are they conservative? They're conservative. And so, when you're doing half, you would say things like, let's say there's a document from an irreconcilable. You would say that they have this point of view opposed to the treaty because they're a conservative and therefore fear diplomacy and are isolationist. Something like that. So you mentioned that, you got half nailed. Yes?
Which group was willing for document 1 a part of?
What about him?
Which group in the Senate was he a part of?
He's in all of them. No.
Yeah.
Now he's a tough one. Because one thing about a lot of liberals were very upset about the horrible treatment of Germany. Horrible treatment. And so, even though they wanted diplomacy, and so he was somebody who, for the most part, would have liked a Treaty of Versailles, but was angry he was angry about the treatment of Germany. And so he was irreconcilable. He was conservative in a lot of ways, but he also kind of wanted the League. Remember what I told you there? You're not necessarily 100% either way, and that's what he was. So he kind of represents both the kind of liberal idea about anger over how bad Germany treated, but also does want this treatment. He's irreconcilable.
And then the New Republic for document 2 was a paper.
What's that?
The New Republic for document 2 was a newspaper.
Yeah, it's a magazine. But you notice that last thing he says, for William Borrow, we are told that this treaty means peace. Even so, I would not pay that price. Would you purchase peace at the cost of your independence? Doesn't that sound like a kind of that conservative idea about losing our, so yeah, nobody is 100% either way of anything. And so you have to go through and pick out which one fits your best. He was in irreconcilable. Yeah. New Republic's a magazine, still around. Have you heard of magazines? I know, they've all kind of gone away. How many documents you need total? 4. And so half for each of the documents. What else do you need? One example of what in each body paragraph?
Outside.
Evidence beyond documents. Outside information, some sentence connected together. Remember context, background, big picture stuff that led up to it, and big picture stuff that, or the conclusion paragraph, big picture stuff that came out of the treaty. The war is coming up, but I gave you a bunch of examples of that. Yeah.
How it connects to.
Yeah, and in fact, I gave you a very specific example of the template. They believe this because they're irreconcilable. or they're conservative, something like that. But you're exactly right. They call it extended analysis. So give additional information about why they take that certain point of view or purpose or attitude to something in that document. Any other questions? What do you need tomorrow? You're gonna have documents, have it all. You're gonna have written on it, have like you've gone through it. And a lot of you already have. Jot down examples of what it relates to what you know, so you can put it in context when you explain the document, when you're trying to show how it connects to your thesis. And then you need paper. I think that makes sense, right? What kind of paper? Lined paper. I know. What are you going to write it in? Pen. Blue or black pen? Yes.
We were talking about it yesterday, but for our outline, we're allowed to have one.
Well, you can have your basic format of it, so you can have it, but I want you to write it down again.
Okay, on another piece of paper?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I want you to go through the timing of like, okay, I got to do this and do that. I got 50 minutes. Can I get it all in?
And you want an outline and a
Yeah, 10 a brainstorm of 10 things.
Okay.
But think about it, you should have 1,000 things. So that's your thing, and be concise. You're doing it for you. So you can use your own shorthand, abbreviations, just put it down. You should know what you mean, I hope. Treaty of Versailles, you can just put Versailles or Vers, V-E-R-S. I know what you mean, I know you know. All right, I think we're gonna have fun with this. Hey, it's a good question. This is a pretty good question, because you can make an actual commitment on and then go from there. How many paragraphs? 4. So the DPQ we're going to do about a week after spring break. You're going to walk in, the documents will be stacked there, and you get to work. That one will be tighter. That one will be on the dropping of the decision to drop the atomic bomb. So, pretty good question. That's a good question. Yeah. And that's what you do on the essay for this one that you have to have 4. And if you have time, do it. But get the main points down. Yeah. It's one thing. It's an issue with this, and it's where we have it. You have to be practical. You have to get the main elements down to do well on, let's say, when we actually do it on the APUs. When I say we, I mean you. I'm not going to take the APUs. Huh?
For the actual,
Yeah.
How long is the actual?
About a month.
How much time do you have?
You have okay, so what you have is you have, they designate an hour. So about 10 to 15 minutes to plan and then write. And then you have a half an hour for the other essay. But they give you this 15-minute block to plan. So you got a lot of time to plan. It's a lot of writing. So you're going to come, does anyone have 2 AP tests on the same day? Wouldn't that be tough? In fact, many years ago when I started AP European history here too. So I taught them both. And I found this out, I didn't want to do that anymore, teach them both. But they had them both on the same day. So I had students who took AP American history in the morning and turned around literally and took the AP European, no time at all between them. They were done at noon and they started the AP European right after. So they walked out kind of like this. They couldn't write. All right, let's go ahead and take your notes out. If there's no more questions on the documents. And if you have any questions, you put it on Teams tonight. I'm trying to look at it, but I'm doing a couple things to do tonight. I'm a busy guy. They let me out of the school occasionally. So I'm going to take advantage of it. And so we'll go from there. Where do we finish it here?
Great migration.
Oh, so we got Great Migration. So we got the strikes. We got the Red Scare, Palmer raids. Yeah, anarchists. Yeah, this was an amazing time. The bombing of Wall Street. And all this because of total war. So we had this, right? Let's keep going past this.
You just have to write down.
And we just got right here.
You just have to write down.
So Great Migration. And that was the movement of African Americans out of the South to the North. And you'll get away from the hell of sharecroppers and Jim Crow. Even though I should add, the North was also segregated, just not necessarily by the same kind of legal framework. It was done by tradition and neighborhoods they wouldn't let in, get a few more. And in World War I, this would accelerate because of the jobs in the factories. But it was almost all to the big cities, especially Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and Detroit. Detroit was a big area of this migration. And so you can see the big cities here. Here is northern Manhattan Island with a region named after a Dutch city called Harlem. And that would be basically kind of de facto segregated area of this great migration. And immediately this is going to fuel in the North racism and nativism. And it already existed, but it would explode because all of a sudden new groups of people came in, and there was fear of the change, fear of the other. And don't forget those sundown towns. Remember the sundown towns? The little towns where they wouldn't let anybody who's not white in. That was no one. Don't let them catch you after dark. Sundown. Well, that made sure that northern town, small towns and suburbs would not allow African Americans in. So it was only in big cities. So that's the phenomenon inside big cities. And this will eventually trigger, after World War II, something they called white flight, of white inhabitants of big cities leaving because they want to get rid or get away from the people who are moving in and going to the suburbs. It was, it's kind of a startling name, but that's what they called it. And so let's get to this. This will trigger, it's no coincidence, a horrific, about 12 months called Red Summer. Now, when people first heard Red Summer, and I've heard people say this, they thought they'd get it confused with the Red Scare. It is tied together with the same kind of reaction against the change, but red was the color of blood. That's what they're talking about here. And this were race riots. They called them race riots, but it was basically attacks by white vigilante groups, many of them tied to the same kind of vigilante groups, Liberty League, American Legion, that attacked Germans and socialists, attacked these new migrants into big cities. And so Washington, D.C. turned into basically armed warfare in the last couple months of 1919. National Guard were called in, and it's no coincidence. You have the treaty ratification, the bad economy, strikes, Red Scare, and this. It just made it seem like the whole country was in upheaval. Chicago, where a significant number of immigrants, and Omaha also. Omaha, Nebraska, now it's down about 500,000 people. The crossroads of civilization, then about 200,000 people. So it was nationwide. Here, they're throwing rocks. That's the process of lynching right there. And this was basically organized white mobs, and then sometimes African Americans would defend themselves and usually get arrested. And we have here, we got this out of order, so I got to make a change here real quick. And so here, that was in Georgia, but it was Red Summer quickly spread into the South. Here are the National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. That's Omaha. That's National Guardsmen arresting a black man in Chicago. And that was put out in a Detroit newspaper saying that basically encouraging whites to rise up against these migrants who are going to start, criminal activity and do horrible things. And the culmination of this would actually happen a year after Red Summer. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1921, the bloodiest of all of these attacks, where a black man was accused of a rape and would be arrested, drug out of prison, and lynched. And that would trigger a riot where these same kind of white vigilante mobs roamed through the segregated sections of Tulsa, killing and burning anybody they could find. I should add, this rape was a very common thing. It was a black man and a white woman who were dating. And that was taboo. So it became rape. And Tulsa, the segregated section of Tulsa will be destroyed. Here, this was a postcard, and they started giving these out. They kind of fun little postcards of the African section they called Little Africa was burning. And the business section of Little Africa was called Black Wall Street. Every building was burned down. We don't know how many people died. The newly established Klan burnt a cross soon afterwards, even though it wasn't the Klan doing it, even though members were involved. It was this full cooperation of the government. In fact, the brand new Air National Guard of Oklahoma City bombed the so-called Little Africa area to stop the riot. They just indiscriminately dropped small bombs into these areas with these old kind of rickety World War I planes. They literally just found a mass grave 3 years ago from this, of about 300 bodies that were hastily buried. So we don't know how many people died. And so this culminated Red Summer. I should add, it's illegal to teach about Red Summer in Tulsa in Oklahoma. You can't talk about this. The justification is because it makes some people who are not black feel bad. I'm not making that up. So it's no coincidence that the Klan would come back. The Ku Klux Klan made a reemergence. Now, I've already mentioned this before. Remember I told you about D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation? Remember that movie? So the Klan started coming back, and that led to like the Confederate statue here in Montana. But what really hit was Red Summer and the Great Migration. The Klan just exploded, especially in the Great Plains, especially in the Great Plains, especially in the Midwest, where there was a significant amount of immigration from. So the Klan really in this area right here and here. But also California, Montana, the Klan was big. And intensely nativist, anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic. Of course, the roots go back to trying to keep black people from voting in the original Klan. But this was basically this idea of true Americanism. True Americanism, whatever that meant. So here's a Klansman standing on top of the Pope. And it says the end. Ending that rage. They're also anti-Mormon, anti-Asian immigrants. It was just, you name it. This is 1923, a Klan rally in Washington, D.C. The Klan started taking over some states. The Klan literally took over the state of Indiana. Was basically every politician had to be a member of the Klan. And they were Republicans. Indiana was a Republican state. But for example, Iowa back then was a Democratic state, and the Klan was really strong, and they were all Democrats. So the Klan was bipartisan, both parties. Doesn't that make you feel like, oh wow, that's a truly so? And I know you've all been waiting for this, Klansmen on a Ferris wheel. I know when you walked into school today, you were not expecting to see this picture. Huh? I took it. I was there, 1924, Iowa State Fair. By the way, the Ferris wheel was 30 years old. The first Ferris wheel was in 1893. There. How's that for a tidbit of information you've been waiting for? Chicago World's Fair. So, I got this out of order. And so it's no coincidence that you have all of these events happening will lead to just this desire for having it to end. And if we could get rid of these dangerous influences on American society, which of course will mean nativism and anti-immigration. And so here is from 1923. Take notice. All the undesirables and rubbish and criminals and trash from Europe. All these immigrants that are committing these horrible crimes in the United States in 1920 and 21, 22, which was not happening. We got to stop them. Same deal. All the undesirables are destroying the idea of the America as a melting pot, and it's got to be stopped. It's no coincidence that the first all-encompassing anti-immigration bill would be passed in this era. All because of these events, starting with the strikes, the Red Scare, Red Summer, the birth of the Klan, the National Origins Act. And for the next 40 years, over 40 years, this in some way would be the law of the land. It set quotas by race, literally by color of skin, and certain races. And they went through and they would have to kind of figure out what races what would be allowed. But they basically pinched off immigration then from everybody, from almost all races, except for Northwestern Europe. And so this was in blue was South and Eastern Europe. Red, North and Western Europe, these are immigrants. And you notice by 1920, significant number from Southern and Eastern Europe, and then the National Origins Act. And you see how it shifted. They pinched them off, and here it's implying all the rubbish from Europe, and we'll only let the good ones in. Only the good ones. So basically, South and Eastern Europe, almost none. How about Africa and Asia? None. They pinched that off to virtually no immigrants. No dangerous immigrants. And what's a dangerous immigrant? It's color of skin. Or what they designed as a race. Remember I told you how they said Slavs were a separate race of Central Europeans. That was seen as a separate race. Italians were a different race than Northern Europeans. This was all constructed, and it became a big deal. How do we do this? How do we decide what an inferior race is? So they listed it out, and it took them a long time to figure out what race fits in where. For example, it was a massive struggle to decide if Northwestern Europeans, which they called in this National Origins Act, Caucasians, were people from the new country of Turkey, were they Caucasians? And they went through and they had to decide, okay, color of skin, they went, okay, shade, and they went through culture, and you can imagine how it was very prejudiced. And they finally decided no, and they changed their mind, yes. But then what about Iranians? They called Persians back then. What about Semites? So people from the Arab Peninsula. Jews were considered an inferior race and not allowed in. And so when the tiny percentage of the population of Germany, Jews in Germany, tiny percentage of the population were Jews. And Nazi Germany took power, and the plan of Nazi Germany was to force Jews to leave Germany, to take away their rights. So they leave. This is the 1930s. And over half the population of Jews in Germany fled Germany before the war began. They fled to the United States, allowed them in. No, because of the National Origins Act. Except for a few high-profile ones like Albert Einstein, who was a Jewish scientist, and by then the best of the most well-known scientists in the world. So a few will be allowed in. My niece and nephew are Jewish, and their relatives came from what is now Lithuania. Or well, it was Lithuania then, but then Russia was whatever. The history of Lithuania. But they arrived his relatives arrived between 1880 and 1900. But in 1938, some of his family members fled Lithuania because they were terrified of what might happen. And the United States did not let them in. So they went back. They had to go back to Lithuania. And they were all killed. So, yeah, that's the connection with my family. So, you're going to have then this whole idea, then why don't we want to allow this? What's the justification? Well, they came up with a scientific justification. There's something called the American Eugenics Society would be created. And the idea was to make sure that we don't mix blood. And so here it is, marriage is fit and unfit, pure, children are normal. Abnormal, abnormal, children abnormal. But if you have pure and abnormal, people breed together, you might get abnormal children. And they give an example here with dead guinea pigs. And they show them if you have pure white guinea pigs breed, you have all white guinea pigs. But once you add different colors to the mix, you get these hybrid mongrels. Are we going to allow the United States to become a mongrel society? And that became the scientific justification. But I should add, what does it sound like? Is this social Darwinism? Isn't this social Darwinism? This is social Darwinism. And the term was eugenics. No race mixing. Selective breeding. We can't allow this. So that would be the justification. I like this. Home for feeble-minded is filled with those whose parents were not carefully selected as dairymen breed cattle. So it started in the United States in the 1890s, but became it swept the country. And there were eugenic societies all over where they would try to encourage parents to breed selectively and make sure that you pick your potential mates based upon their race, so you breed correctly. And they would do things like picking the most purebred child. They had these competitions. Yes, there was in Montana. There was a Montana Eugenic Society. And, for example, idiots could barely control themselves. Are you going to let them breed? Morons can at least do work requiring reason and judgment. Yeah, this is from 1926. A high-grade imbecile, medium imbecile, low-grade imbecile. Are we going to let them breed? Imagine breeding a low-grade imbecile with somebody who's normal. I'm not really making this up. And let's get to them. That will, of course, lead to, one thing about this we have to add here is forced sterilization. So you must sterilize people that would be seen as inadequate breeders. I should add, most of the people who are going to be sterilized will be people of, or based on skin color. So yes, a significant number of American Indians in Montana were sterilized. That's why Montana passes sterilization to stop American Indians from. Yeah, they've already gone through enough, and so they haven't gone through enough is what I meant to say. Yeah, those are all the states that allow for sterilization. There would still be forced sterilization in some southern states, especially well into the 1980s. It is fascinating. We have a combination of either sterilization and sometimes forcing people to have children. It's an interesting combination of things that go on. I should add one more thing about eugenics. Some other people around the world might find this a very attractive idea. Another American influence around the world. So, I think you probably have a good guess where I'm guessing. Does everyone know what I'm referring to? So, ironically, despite all that happened, a unique cultural explosion would happen with the Great Migration. The Great Migration would be this kind of urban culture combining all the different parts of America. So you're going to have, regardless of color of skin, when you have all these people coming together, creating new types of music and art, dance, and most importantly, in this era, jazz. And that's why sometimes it would be called the Jazz Age. And I actually really like 20's jazz a lot. I like 20's jazz. Here's the great composer and band leader Cap Calloway. He played at the Cotton Club in Harlem, which is still there. And it was this kind of black and white combined. Yeah. 1920s. Rock and roll is another example of this great combination of things coming together. It's called the Harlem Renaissance because that was there in New York. That's the center of the Great Migration. And I should add, there's going to be a big reaction against this. Jazz music, mixing. That can only mean one thing. It's got to be stopped. So, what we're coming up to, therefore, is the so-called Roaring 20s. And the Roaring 20s were this myth about the 1920s, that it was, fun, glamorous, exciting, speakeasies. Oh, there's Cap Calloway right there. With a largely white audience. And also another one of unprecedented prosperity, where everybody was getting rich. And also this concept, as long as you worked hard and tried, you could go far in life. This should remind you of that free labor ideology. Remember that way back when in the 1840s? And Horatio Alger. It's very social Darwinistic too. And this myth really came about in the 1920s, a little bit what's going on, but people looking back at the 20s from the depths of the Depression. And it seemed like, wow, the 20s was great. But in reality, it was bookended by two horrible depressions. And don't forget, it started with a plague. The Lost Generation. this horrible war, the Red Scare, Red Summer, the birth of the Klan, and the entire farming economy was destroyed. The 1920s was an incredible time of all kinds of contradictions. So let's get to a few things about the 1920s. We're going to watch a fantastic video on that. We're going to start it today so we can finish it on Friday. So also in the 1920s, they made a massive elk and brought it to the streets of Missoula. I know. And one more thing about this, and all of you, I know are thinking right now, right? Wouldn't that be a great flow for the Vigilante Parade? Who's with me? Vigilante Parade? Come on, people. So, the 20s would be personified with a reaction to all the change and a reaction to what had just happened in the few years before the decade. And more, they're starting to call this reaction conservatism. Now, we have seen this reaction before. It is very similar to the reaction to the Industrial Revolution, the wage system, and capitalism of the 1830s and 1840s, which totally just blew up American society then. 20s will be similar in a lot of ways. So the fear of this new modernism, all this technology and change, but not just that, this modern idea where women can vote, and society changing with the Great Migration. So the fear of all this, the entire economy was shifting to a more consumer economy. Entertainment totally changed. Something that came out of nowhere in 1920 would explode across the night. By 1922, that everybody would have to get this crazy thing called a radio, and it just blew people away. So there was a real fear amongst those who, coming out of disruption after World War I, would lose what status they had. And we saw the same thing with the growth of the wage system and how the wage system and the Industrial Revolution changed everything. And this fear of losing status will lead to a number of things. Of course, nativism. Immigrants were coming in, or internal migration and changing society. Also, social Darwinism really came as an element of this worship of the individual and the idea that people do not understand that there are natural hierarchies and you should not step out of your lane. You should not step out, especially women, and especially those who are not Protestant. Yeah.
So was it just the American social Darwinism changed, or was it like social Darwinism coming back? Because we already talked about.
Yeah, social Darwinism became more dominant. Even though, ironically, there'll be people who would say they're radically opposed to it, but actually believe it. And then, of course, a radical shift in the Protestant Christianity in America, but would soon spread across the ocean. Fundamentalism would begin. It actually started in a book from 1911 called The Fundamentals of the Christian Church. And it was the idea that the church should go back to its old-fashioned, very strict interpretation of it. The important word here is interpretation of the Bible. And they talk about old-timey or old-timer religion. It's very similar in a way to that Second Great Awakening. I don't know why I copied it. Ache. Awakening. The Second Great Awakening. And it's very, very similar with this idea of revivals and a lot of fire and brimstone speeches. It's the great, as in famous, hugely influential preacher Billy Sunday. And they would broadcast on this new medium of a radio, and you could listen to it, and it just changed the way everyone felt. And a lot was heaven or hell. Fire and brimstone sermons. You must convert now or face a fiery end. And if you've ever heard of something called the rapture, the idea of this came out of the Second Great Awakening. But that term would come out of the development of fundamentalism in the teens of the 20th century and then take over in the 1920s. And I should add, this old-time religion, to go back, that was never the way religion was. They made it up. They made up an old-timey religion. And that fits in very much of the definition of conservatism. Restore ourselves to an idealized time. Not the actual past, but we would have liked the past to be. They look back a lot to the 1890s. Now, boy, the 1890s were great. Forgetting the terrible economic disaster, the Pullman strike, Coxey's army, farmers losing everything, and war. They forgot all that part. In the 1970s, and look back to the 50s, people always would look back to this idealized time. They don't want to go back to that time. They just want to recreate their vision of that. And all of us have elements of this. We all have some elements. And so people who are conservative are generally pretty much more conservative. They are more like this, but even people who don't consider themselves conservative, we have elements of this. And one important element of this too is people knew their place. And this was said all the time. That's very social Darwinistic. They knew their place. And once again, I can't emphasize this enough. When women got the right to vote, they acted like they knew more than men. They got to be put in their place. It's no coincidence that the cult of domesticity will make a huge return after this era, especially in the 1950s. Remember the cult of domesticity? Yeah. But it's also by color of skin. We've already talked about that. So what an amazing time. But it was a reaction to this new and changing world. So for example, here's a proposal in Missouri to stop jazz. Because we all know this music is combined and it's like an intoxicant. It affects young people like liquor. We must fight it like booze. They do the same thing about rock and roll. In the 1950s, we got to stop it. And so we're not going to do the Scots monkey trial. That's going to be the videos. But let's get very quickly into the politics of the 1920s. It very much fit in the same thing. It was conservative. It really tried to get back to that old style, isolationism, and a new kind of economic system called trickle-down economics. So trickle-down economics was basically Hamiltonian economics, laissez-faire economics, combined now into a modern economic idea for the new consumer economy. On Monday, I will chart exactly how trickle-down economics work, trickle-down economics. It is the basis of conservative economics today, and it will come out in the 1920s. So it's the basis of our state government now, and it's the basis of, well, most of your life you've been trickled down. So let me give you an example. That's the election of 1920. We have Warren G. Harding, the mediocre senator from Ohio. Oh, that was done on purpose. He's non-threatening. He's not going to overwhelm you with anything like intelligence. And he's from Ohio. Remember, Ohio still ran it. And his slogan, a return to normalcy. His vice president would be Calvin Coolidge. Why Coolidge? Because he used the National Guard to brutally put down strikes in 1919. So that made him a hero in the Republican Party, anti-union, anti-labor. The Democrats were kind of in disarray because of all the problems after the war. Wilson was a Democrat, so they're going to be blamed for these problems. They nominate a fairly conservative James Cox, but an up-and-coming Franklin Roosevelt, who was the Undersecretary of the Navy. His uncle, or his cousin, was Teddy Roosevelt. Don't forget Debs ran from prison. And Harding's slogan, a return to normalcy. We're going to go back. Their slogan? Their slogan was basically won the war. And Harding had another one, America first. Go back to normal, America, not the rest of the world. So is a return to normalcy in America first, how would you define that? That's very conservative. Very conservative. And you'll see this today. America first is used all the time today. So it fits in with that very conservative idea. And I like this one. Back to normal, American first. Back to normal. And it worked. Harding won an overwhelming victory. An overwhelming victory. And so on that happy note, I want everybody to take out that thing we did to Killing Fields, had the reading on the Treaty of Versailles. And go to a walk through the 20th century with Bill Moore. Here is a. You gave it to me? Let me look at it, I'll find it. So, we're going to watch, this is my favorite video on the 1920s, and you'll soon see why. Maybe. This is Bill Moyers. He was a really famous reporter. I fast forward just a little bit. I'm in this video.